Good morning, everyone. My name is Victor Lataki, and I'm one of the members of the CSPC Events Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Canadian Science Policy Conference takes place on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose time reaches back here to time immemorial. We respect our traditional hosts, and we thank them for continuing to operate on this land. Now, we're about to participate in the interactive panel, Empowering Entrepreneurship and Innovation in Clean Energy Technology, organized by NRC IRAP and moderated by Jeanette Jackson, CEO of Foresight Canada. Please don't forget to tweet about the event using @SciencePolicy and hashtag CSPC 2022. And finally, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation survey in the program app. Enjoy the panel.
Awesome. Thank you. Kicking off, right? Woo! Who's excited to be here on the first day of snow in Ottawa? Yeah. Well, I came from Egypt at COP, and I'm happy, I know, throughout our conversation this morning to share some interesting findings and learnings there. But I packed in a carry-on only, and I don't have any rain boots or anything. So if anyone has any tips or tricks on how to survive the snow for the next couple of days, that would be awesome. My name is Jeanette Jackson. I'm the CEO of Foresight Canada. If you have not heard about us, we are the largest clean tech or climate tech accelerator in the country. We really try to take a collaborative whole of ecosystem approach to helping ventures ideate, commercialize, and scale their technologies, and also make sure that industry, academia, government, and private capital are at the table through that journey. To say that I'm pleased to be here is an understatement. Coming back from a conference like that, you certainly feel a renewed sense of energy and commitment and passion, which, as you could probably guess, energy is not one of my low points. But I'm really excited about the panel that we're going to have today. You do probably see a few empty seats. We do have one individual whose flight was canceled this morning or later last night, and so won't be joining us. And so we're going to have a really exciting conversation with Dave and Devesh. We really want this to be an engaging and lively conversation. If you open your app, you can see that there are some poll questions there. So as we're listening to some of the introductions and getting started, please do take a time or a moment to go through and answer some of those questions. And really, it's all about digging into some of the lived experiences of the entrepreneurs and innovators across Canada who are doing incredible work in the sector. We have the privilege of supporting a couple of hundred of these companies per year. Over the last several years, we're almost at 1,000 clean tech companies across Canada who have been engaged or supported by Foresight and other incredible organizations. And the sector is ramping up so exponentially, and clean energy is such a critical pathway for Canada's net zero transition. And it's really the supports like IRAP, who I'm a huge fan of, not to be biased, but lots of incredible programming that really start with IRAP at that foundational point of some of these ventures to help them scale up. So very excited to have the conversation this morning. We're going to start by getting a bit of an understanding about the Industrial Research Assistance Program, which I always call IRAP, and acronyms are not a shortage here in Canada. But more importantly, how they have been serving the Canadian innovation ecosystem for over 75 years. David Lisk, who's one of the VPs in the organization, will walk us through some of those details. He's been a VP since 2017, and I don't want to dig in too much because now that he's joining the panel, we've agreed that I'm going to open up and have him share his experience at IRAP during his career and some of the great work that they've been doing. So most importantly, David, why don't you kick us off and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeanette, and bonjour tout le monde. I'm really pleased to be here, and it's an opportunity for us to think about the support required for firms to grow in the clean tech space, where it's a little bit more difficult than if you're just going to build an app and put it out through Apple. It's a completely different model. It's far closer to life science than it is to ICT, which is the tech space. I wrote a note because it's snowing, and 77, not 75, but 77 years ago, C.D. Howe and another gentleman were stuck at an airport waiting for the snow to clear so that they could go home. And they were noodling about post-World War II. And I bring up World War II because it was a very traumatic time for the world. And we recovered. The idea was, what does Canadian industry need to transition from a wartime footing to a peacetime product footing? And they came up with IRAP. And in 1947, it was transferred to the National Research Council, and it was called the Technical Information Service. So it was all advice. In fact, we did not contribute $1 to a firm until the 1960s. We still, our foundation is on advisory services and funding as appropriate. So I bring that up because when I think about where we are today, the world has become an equally difficult place at this point in time. We're recovering from a pandemic. If someone had told me last year, 2 years ago, we're going to have a shooting war in Europe, I would have put a lot of money against that. So it's a very interesting time. We have bifurcating policies and politics in the democracies. We have an environment where blocks of countries are now again starting to square off, something we hadn't seen since the Cold War. And all of that backdrop fits into the climate change situation that we have in the world. And the amount of money and support that the creative firms around the world, but we're talking about Canada, in Canada, that they need is tremendous. It is not a dabble a few dollars around and declare victory and go home, because half of the coasts will be underwater and we will have droughts. We don't appreciate the fact that we're not getting vegetables and strawberries from California for very much longer because of the droughts that will persist, assuming that climate change continues in the direction that it's going. The other thing through the pandemic we've noticed, we've changed how we work. And I was a very cross individual because I wanted to come and chat with you, but when I opened the window or opened the blinds this morning and saw the snow, going, I have to go through that traffic. And there's a whole collection of folks today who just stayed home and had a snow day, but they're doing a full day's work. And it's a completely different environment than we had in the past. The other change that's happening, which I should not forget, is the change in capital. Up and into the pandemic, capital was very cost effective or cheap. The venture world has seized up. Deals that were done, and we had a record last calendar year, record amount of deals done in Canada for venture capital. This year, we've hit a low point that we haven't seen in a while. And the cost, and you say, well, they're just giving money. The amount of ownership that the capital that is coming from venture capitalists are taking from the entrepreneurs has increased. So instead of taking 10% to do a deal, they now want 25. They will eventually price themselves to a point where the entrepreneurs will continue to build it without venture capital, but far more slowly, or they're just going to close up shop because they can't get the capital for the price that makes sense for them to slave away at the hard work of being an entrepreneur. So the planet, as we move forward, when I thought about this conference, and I was thinking about the firms that we fund, and we're a very broad program. We are not a environmentally focused program. We focus on entrepreneurs who, through innovation, want to build a company that they can sell their products or their services worldwide, preferably, or simply in Canada. But then I started to think about how many companies do we support that are clean companies in the sense. We have one called Ranovis, who makes a switch, an optical switch that connects servers in all of those server farms. And because it runs on optics, it reduces the power that's consumed. And as soon as you reduce the power, you reduce the heat, the air conditioning goes down, and you can start, theoretically, you can start turning off some of those dirty power plants because you're saving power. That's just one example of a cross effect from an entrepreneurial company that's creating a product that they see a need for, but has the knock-on effect of reducing consumption. Now, the government of Canada is completely committed to supporting SMEs and SMEs in this space. There's not just IRAP. I mean, I get up every day and I think about, how fantastic IRAP is and can be. However, there's many other programs that are specifically supporting the growth of entrepreneurial companies in the clean tech space, in the environmentally friendly space. NRCan has programs. I said, now, hopefully, if the acronyms are causing people distress because you don't know what they mean, put your hand up and I will be a little bit more verbose, but I'm assuming the room is conversant in government acronyms. So Industry Canada, I said, also ECCC have programming that supports entrepreneurs. When I think about how far NRC comes, and I should probably talk a little bit about NRC so you get sort of an idea of its footprint. So the National Research Council has 14 research centers. They cover everything from aerospace to life science to environment, mining, etc. Very focused on helping industry, and unlike IRAP, who works with SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises only, they can work with any company of any size that can leverage their expertise. And they are currently working at building, supporting the testing of long-haul trucks to make them more aerodynamic. They have a significant program around aircraft engines to make them more fuel efficient, and it goes on. And in batteries, they have a complete battery testing facility. So they're the people you go to when you want to blow up your lithium-ion batteries and see what happens. So it's very cool. Everybody leaves the room though when they do that. It's not just that. So we have 100 buildings, 27 locations. We are committed as the NRC to make our footprint carbon neutral. So they're working on that. So we're putting in practice the dialogue that is happening around us. My boss, the president of the NRC, has a car that's supported because he's a deputy minister level individual, and it's a completely electric car. And he did that way before we, as Canada, really had the dialogue going to change our behaviors and our inputs. In the fall economic statement, now this is a bit of a shameless plug, so please bear with me. In the fall economic statement, the Government of Canada showed a very strong support for the National Research Council and its research centers by implementing a recapitalization program for the research centers so that they can transform from arguably post-World War II facilities in some cases to modern facilities that support the carbon neutral footprint, but also create the digital twins. So it's less about physical buildings and testing equipment. It has to now be married with servers and the capability to investigate challenges using artificial intelligence, et cetera. So enough shameless plug about NRC. Let's go and talk a little bit quickly about IRAP and then sector teams, and then I'm going to hand everything back to Jeanette. So IRAP's been around for a long time. Last year, we had a fantastic year, in fact. We supported either with advice or funding, or advice and funding, and generally speaking, you don't get funding without taking the advice, because the role of the program, and I just learned this as I saw the budget in in the spring. Apparently, our program is Schumpeterian in that Schumpeter was an economist, and so our program is to create benefits to Canada over the long term through our advice and through our funding to change the behavior of the firm in a positive way for the benefit of Canada and the firm, but for the benefit of Canada. And so when we get up in the morning and we put our socks on, all we're thinking about are companies and how we can help them to improve and to do things better. And that's not just technical. That is, can we help them with their sales and marketing? Can we help them go international, et cetera? And so last year we had 10,000 companies we supported that way, 3,000 with funding. We have a field staff of industrial technology advisors. And of course, if we were starting today, we wouldn't call them that, but we started 77 years ago, so we call them that. The folks are like me, and I don't know if you've seen my profile, 25 years in the private sector before I joined IRAP. And so all of the ITAs that we hire have a profile of being in the private sector, and they actually have to have been working in the private sector within the last 3 years, or they're actually screened out. You have to be from the private sector, which makes us a really weird organization because we have a tug of let's just do it, let's get her done, entrepreneurial, in the confines, in the hands of a government organization. And so there is always a constructive dialogue happening around that. We have, over time, created the sector teams, and I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotes around what we're doing to support them. So I was chatting here, and one of the things that we have discovered, and this is not entirely a sector team, but it was a grassroots program, that when IRAP supports a company, and we have to proactively disclose, XYZ Co. is going to receive up to $100,000 or $1 million or whatever it is, they're immediately attacked by bad actors from around the world and have their networks hacked and their IP stolen. So we have changed our program for the first time in 75 years. There's a mandatory advisory service that you have to take before you're allowed to accept a contract, which is you have to have a cybersecurity session. We help you stiffen up the technology that you use to make sure that you can at least withstand the general attacks that happen. There are other and more insidious ones, but that takes a significantly higher amount of effort on the part of an SME. The other thing that we're doing to help environmentally friendly related clients is fast pilots. We run 2 fast pilot programs, and they are, so it's interesting because it's a pilot. It's a piloting of their technology with a partner. One is in another jurisdiction, so in another country, and the other one is a partnership with the British Columbian government, and so in British Columbia. And so a company finds a partner, and we support the firm to pay the costs of putting the pilot in place. And so there's an existence proof that's generally required with new technologies, and people want to see that it actually works before they pay. And especially in foreign jurisdictions, if we can get one that's up and running, all the neighbors will want one. And so we do that. Another program we're running is with the Canadian Space Agency. You're seeing a trend here. We partner with a lot of other government groups to run calls around harsh environments. So space, one of the harshest environments, around food, around health, around technology that could be applicable in another harsh environment. Now, you think our environment is harsh today because of the snow, but I'm thinking about the Arctic and the high north, where technologies that work in space can be equally deployed and used in that environment as well. Where I want to go with in closing here is it takes a lot of support for companies to grow, especially in a long gestation period space that clean tech is. You have to be able to engage with them, help them to get their minimum viable product, help them to get their first client, help them to protect their intellectual property, make sure they're cyber secure. And all of those things are what the ITAs think of when they get up in the morning and they're putting on their socks. They're going, XYZ Co, what's the next thing that they need to do? And where we need to go as a government is IRAP does one thing, but we don't do everything. There are standards that have to be established. There are procurement policies that have to be considered. Shouldn't we be buying from our own space, our own folks to put in products? What kind of procurement set-asides could be put up possible, et cetera? All of those things are important, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to find your first client. Through Innovative Solutions Canada, which is a very broad, I'm not going to guess, I can't remember, many government organizations are all involved. NRC takes advantage of that, and we have been procuring products from innovative Canadian SMEs and helping them to get their prototypes into the market for the last 5 years. And those kinds of programs need more oomph behind them, I think, so that government is bringing forward the technologies that are needed. And I'm probably way past 15 minutes, but I apologize for that. So thanks, everybody, and back to Jeanette.
It's okay. We're going to hear more from Dave. It's funny he brought up life sciences because I'm a serial entrepreneur from the clean tech space. And when I was fundraising, there was a joke that everyone thought clean tech had these long cycles. And I said, well, we're actually shorter than life science companies. So if you're an investor, it's a better investment. Although we've seen the basically coming down of both COVID and climate over the last 2 years, and both are important. Before I sort of dig in and introduce Devesh, a couple of things. There are some incredible acronyms, and Innovative Solutions Canada is certainly one. Their plastics programs have been incredible over the last couple of years, and it's 22 ministries actually give that percentage of the budget to pool together buying power. And if I would represent the group of SMEs that we support, government procurement and buying power is certainly something that can really help with domestic adoption of solutions. And a couple of other important groups like STTC, BDC, EDC really collaborate to work on the funding and other aspects of scaling technologies as well. In terms of our experience with IRAP, Foresight does work quite a bit with the organization. The ITAs and the network that they've created is truly incredible. It is people that understand both the business and technical side, which is a very rare breed in government, to really understand sort of what the ventures need and to push them on that commercialization business mentality, but also be, practical in terms of what milestones they need to achieve to commercialize, their solutions. And I've been impressed with some of the actual ITAs that are behind the scenes that also have access to capital networks and a lot of international connections as well. So as mentioned, over the last 2 years, we have seen an incredible amount of pressure on both health and climate. At Foresight, our big, hairy, audacious goal is that Canada be the first G7 country to reach net zero, and it's really through an innovation lens. I was at COP, as mentioned, and some of the indicators around food, water, and energy security are more real and apparent than ever. And hearing stories from some of our Indigenous colleagues, I mean, their traditional practices of, looking up and predicting weather for them to do hunting and get out and do, day-to-day activities is no longer relevant because the fluctuations in climate are so unpredictable that they have to, these groups are looking at technologies now to help, do their day-to-day practices. So when green values are part of your philosophy as an entrepreneur, you really do need a support network. There are a lot of companies that do apps and other, easy to deploy technology solutions, but a lot of the work being done is hard tech. It's very integrated with industry. That's complicated supply chains and operating systems that are trying to be disruptive. And I think that's a perfect segue to introduce Devesh, who is CEO of Pani, and he'll give an overview of sort of what he's been up to, his experience with IRAP, and then we'll dig into an open conversation amongst the three of us.
Hi. Oh, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Devesh. As mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Pani. Pani is a company I started in my undergrad while I was researching at UVic. I see Brent and some old professors there. Well, our mission at Pani is to reduce about 510 million tons of emissions per year by decarbonizing the water treatment infrastructure, which is about a percentage of current global emissions. The water problem is quite interesting, in my opinion. We understand the issues with climate adaptation when it comes to water, with droughts and access to water getting lower, but it actually has a decent role to play in climate mitigation as well. Like right now, around 3 to 4% of global emissions just goes towards treating water. So that's industries, cities, treating their water is quite energy intense, and it's quite carbon intensive. And with the climate change happening, a lot of places like California, India, the Middle East has been doing this for a long time. They're not able to get water like they were before, just surface water, groundwater, it's all salty. So now the cost and carbon intensity of water is actually changed by 25x. That's a lot more money, a lot more carbon emissions that water is leading to. And the same thing with industries. Industries cannot just discharge wastewater like pulp and paper and the sectors in Canada, US, and they have to reuse all their water, which is also, in many cases they burn coal, natural gas, so it's quite greenhouse gas intensive. And that's the problem we're solving at Pani. We use artificial intelligence for a sector that has been pretty archaic in how they actually manage their water assets. So we take data from the existing plants, use operational AI, and help operators make decisions on an ongoing basis that helps them improve their greenhouse gas emissions by lowering their costs, their energy, and their operating risk. And we've had a really good experience with IRAP. I just have to say that, not just because Dave's here. But so we got introduced through IRAP through University of Victoria's Innovation Center. And we were working out of my garage at the time because we had too much water for experiments, and UVic kicked us out because it was a liability risk. But then we were at the garage, and the folks from IRAP came to visit us, the two ITAs there. And I think, at that time we were quite early, so they kind of passed on us at the time. We kind of did not know what we were doing. We were focusing both on hardware and software, but they kept on following us. I met our ITA Hong for coffee regularly, got advice, and through, I think, about 6 to 9 months, they saw our progress as we grew as a company. And that's when they actually invested and helped us do a project, which allowed me to hire more people and kind of accelerate our R&D. And the interesting thing was, while we were doing that, we started working with a customer to test our technology. It was a plant in India, just because I had contacts there. and we were implementing a technology, and while implementing it, we learned that our hypotheses were wrong. We were going to actually retrofit existing facilities, but then we realized that doing a hardware change is quite not cost effective. It's just the economics won't scale. We won't be able to make that much of an impact globally. So we pivoted. We looked at the data, and we noticed that just software has a much better impact. And I was actually a bit worried at that time because we had raised capital from government, some investors, and like changing directions like that. I wasn't sure how nimble the funding would be in terms of helping us grow. And I was very positively surprised that IRAP was actually encouraging us from a business standpoint, that this is the right business model. They were able to help us pivot, change our directions, which really helped us at the time. So that's how we started with IRAP back then, a smaller project. I think back then it was $50,000 a range were the first projects for companies. And then after that project, we got actually 2 fast pilots. So we did a fast pilot in India, and we did one in the US. That helped us, kind of work with some of the best companies in those regions, get some references, and just get our name in the market. Now, as Jeanette said, clean tech is faster than life sciences, but I don't think it's as fast as other sectors. And these are critical infrastructures. So when you are selling something, the ratio of promise of value versus the fear of failure for a lot of these asset owners is quite high. So having enough references and case studies is very important for them to make the buying decision and get moving. And those fast pilots helped us kind of demonstrate and get some good references in those areas and grow from there. And throughout the time, IRAP, as was mentioned earlier, was like a mentor. They were like a good investor, good mentor. And I'm a first-time founder, so there's more things I don't know than I know. And that was a great experience through that. And through the time as well, actually IRAP helped us introduce us to investors as well. They helped us introduce to some VCs locally that helped in our seed round. And just for reference, we raised, I would say, around $12 million so far as a company, both equity, non-equity. And I've kind of grown the team from, 2 people back then to now 42 to 45 people. But I'll kind of stop there, Jeanette, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. So as mentioned, there are 2 companies that aren't represented. And one thing I wanted to touch on is that the reality is, as an entrepreneur, every journey is different. It's certainly not linear. And companies come into Foresight and IRAP, they have different competencies and experiences on the teams. Some of their basically go-to-market strategies are quite different and require a lot of different factors and supports. So if you as a policy maker or, representing different government organizations, trying to understand, how you can provide supports or be part of Canada's net zero transition through your own policy and supporting innovators, it's definitely good to understand that you kind of need to build platforms that are not one size fits all. Or it has to be very dynamic and open. So Stefan Walter was to be here. They represent Summit Nano Technologies, which are a lithium mining company. They too have a water component, but are very efficient in sourcing lithium, which are critical minerals for many different technology pathways to net zero. And Robert Niven from Carbon Cure, and they essentially have technologies that allow concrete to be net negative by putting carbon into the concrete. So 2 companies, again, different pathways, different funding structures, all of which have been supported by an incredibly dynamic IRAP team. I think you touched on something as well, Devesh, how IRAP funding works. It's project-based, but it's I don't want to use the term flexible, but you define the project, and there's sometimes uncertainties when you're an entrepreneur. So they're really flexible in terms of understanding what the outcome of the project is, but also making sure that, okay, some new hiccups might come, and how do we tackle that together? And I think that's a good segue to sort of pass it over to Dave to just talk about IRAP's journey in terms of how programs have been developed and the philosophy around those programs.
Sure. Yeah. So the only way you can get a project with IRAP is to be invited. So there's no form on the web. You have to talk to an ITA, and as described, you actually takes a bit to convince the jaded ITA that you're worth investing in. And so from there, a project is struck. And that conversation has outcomes, expected performance improvements, it has a work plan, and then it has a whole bunch of terms and conditions, which means that you're not allowed to sell out and you can't do bad things, etc. You have to follow all the sanction rules, for instance, which is a new clause that we've added to our contracts. That process is helping the entrepreneurial company, especially some of the smaller ones, to be thoughtful and robust in their planning. And we don't just give you the money and wander away. In fact, we come back every month, every 2 months, and we say, how's it going? Can you show me what you got? And there's demos are required. And why? Because we've discovered over the eons of existence that we've had that the regimen of check-ins and all of those topics makes the projects go better. Now, I have an anecdote about a fairly large AI company out of Quebec City where they undertook a new product line, and we funded that work towards that new product line. And their main product line was going gangbusters. And what the CEO told our ITA was, I'm so glad we have the project with you because it forces us to continue to do the work on that product line because we actually need it, but the tyranny of the urgent would suck us back and we would be working on our mainstream products. And so it's not just for little co's. The discipline works for larger co's as well. Maybe I should say what our very basic terms and conditions are. You have to be a company who wants to grow through innovation. You have to operate in Canada. You don't have to be incorporated in Canada. A foreign entity could come and put up a plant or a facility, and if it made sense, we could literally fund them. Now, that is rare. I don't even think we've ever done that, but that's the breadth of our terms and conditions. And you have to have less than 500 employees. That's it. Other than that, it's up for discussion with the Industrial Technology Advisor to determine whether these conditions are valid and they believe that your project is risky. And so risk is a key element. And in fact, I was at in Quebec, in Montreal yesterday, and I was talking to the Quebec team, and we were talking about do the companies have to have no risk before we will invest? And in fact, if that was true, if there was no risk in the project, IRAP would be out of business because we fund companies to take risk because they can't get the money from the bank. If you can go to the bank because it's simple, then go to the bank. We're here to help the companies undertake risk, but mitigate the risk as well. The ITAs work with the firms to mitigate what's going on. And so as we move forward, the changes that we have seen over the last 20 years, I would say, is IRAP was founded on advice, but technical advice, TIS, technical information services. We used to look at the technology exclusively. So in 1995, and if it was shiny and bright and cool, we're in. Now we have balanced it. It has to be cool, but there also has to be business prospects, commercialization prospects that we believe the company can undertake or can grow into undertaking. So a company with 2 people, as we're describing here, they have to get their product together. They have to get their minimum viable product out. They have to find a lead customer. They don't have to make money off the hop. But eventually, we have to believe that they could. And so I talked about cybersecurity. I want to talk about business innovation, which is my last topic, and then I'll hand it back. So one of the things that we have discovered in the last 5 years, yes, the company that we're talking with has the prospects, but they're struggling to make commercial progress. And so we have put together, now, programs are a big word in the government, so let's call it a service. We've put together a service whereby we work with the company and with some other providers to help them on their commercialization journey. And what we have discovered is, as we do that, products that were languishing and not moving start to sell. Because we're educating, I want to be careful how I say this, but educating the entrepreneurs on how to sell their products into the marketplace. And that has been a very significant 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x growth in sales.
Yeah, and that's where there's a lot of collaboration between organizations like Foresight and IRAP, where we have 170 EIRs and mentors that are all industry, commercialization, business model, and so there's a huge complement of activity to support the entrepreneur. Now, Devesh, over to you a little bit. You talked a little bit in terms of your journey. You know, you had the coffee, you got a couple of no's, finally a small project, and that, you know, support increased over time. Can you just walk through, there's some new folks in the room, just really walk through those steps, and then perhaps where there may be some gaps in, not necessarily that IRAP can fill, but just broader, you know, as a Canadian clean tech company?
Yeah, for sure. And just to what Dave was saying over there, I think what I found is, especially in Canada, it's hard to get private capital to take science risk. So that's a big blocker if you need to commercialize or bring something, you know, outside a research project to actually create value and do what it's intended. There's not much capital that's willing to take risk in the private sector in science. It's a different story down in Boston or San Francisco. Like, those two regions have quite a lot of venture capital firms that are excited about taking science risk, but not in Canada. And in my experience, I found there's not enough. And that's a good spot that IRAP kind of fills in. You know, technology readiness level is at a point where there is still some science risk, and you're not going to have enough capital that's going to give you enough, you know, valuation that you can survive and then do Series A, B, C, and scale. So that's kind of a spot that's, you know, empty, which IRAP kind of filled for us. So as when we started, we had you know, I wouldn't say had product market fit, but at that time we had a hypothesis of product market fit. It was, you know, if we had product market fit, we would just go for Series A financing. But at that time, we knew there's a problem in the market. You know, these plants, they are running ineffectively, and we needed just capital to keep on going and keep on hiring people and just keep on testing. So that's where we did our first project. The first project was around $50K, and it was to advance the technology a bit. And, you know, it's easy to...
Were there matching fund requirements?
Yeah, that was, I was going to speak to that. So there was some matching fund requirements, and I want to talk about that a little bit later too, how things like that could, if they were more flexible, that can accelerate some things from entrepreneurs. So there was matching funding requirements, but it's also easier to match money when you have money. So for the whole journey of the company, not exactly, but I would say, you know, we've always matched dollar to dollar. So as soon as we got some government funding, we went to investors, leveraged that, because for them it de-risks the company. And now if they were to give you $1 million, you would have $2 million. So risk is a big factor for early stage VCs, and longer runway you have to test your hypothesis, the lower risk you have. And I think that, you know, IRAP helped us with that, SCTC helped us with that, and just different stages of the company. So the first, I think there was around $25K of private capital needed for us to get any money.
Call your parents, sell some things out of the garage.
Yeah, no, you know, I actually called professors. Yeah. That's you know, they say you go to friends, family, and fools early on, but for me, the professors I worked with early on, they were kind enough to give some of the capital in. So 25K, I think is relatively, I mean, I can say easy now. Back then it was super hard, but I think, you know, for an entrepreneur to do something good, they should find a way to raise 25K themselves. I think that's a good enough ask. And we did that project, and like I said, we pivoted in the middle of the project. We went from a hardware retrofit technology to a software company, and I knew nothing about software. So I had to hire folks there. But anyways, that was successful first project. And my memory is kind of faint at that point, but we did 2 fast pilots. I believe they were 100K plus per project that allowed us to actually go the final mile and take what we had built and implement that at real facilities and do partnerships with some big companies. One of them was Tata in India, and another one was Aquatech in the USA. And that de-risked our customer and partner to work with us. We were a small company at that time, but knowing that our app is supporting, that actually gives a sense of credibility as well. So in many ways, that helped us build partnerships. And clean tech, at least in our space, is a very global market. We just can be successful by focusing in Canada. Vertical focused companies usually are global, right? Because you, like desalination plants and wastewater plants, we need to look at it globally. So that was a big jump for us. That helped us de-risk our commercialization in many dimensions. Okay, how to build product, how to do partnerships, how to implement it. What's the structure required? What people do you need on each side? So a lot of those things that you need to kind of grow faster. And then after that, we got a larger SDTC fund, and I think the IRAP funding actually really helped us there, because both funds take risk, but I think IRAP takes more risk at an earlier stage, and then we were able to de-risk that, and then we were able to take about, I believe about $3 million from SDTC to take that project to the next stage. And recently, we took a bit larger fund from IRAP, around I think 400K, to accelerate another product line within our existing product line. A similar example to the Quebec company, which got more easier. I think over time, how to build projects, how to maintain them, how to build relationships, how to work effectively. So it got easier over time. I think earlier on it was government funding was work to maintain in general, right? That's just what it is. You just have to do a lot of reporting, but it over time just gets easier. And to your question, Jeanette, what in general could be improved? I would say, I'd say more money quicker always helps. That's like a broad statement, but I think that was one. And the second was flexibility in how we can allocate capital. Like a lot of the government funding are some ways they're structured in a way where they make you spend capital that's just on people, and it's even difficult to hire contractors or things like that. And then
sometimes you don't need that expertise for a long period of time. You need to bring it in for a short period of time to solve a critical path problem, and then you need new expertise, right, to sort of have some flexibility on the journey of the project.
Exactly, yeah. And I can understand that from the government standpoint. They want companies to help hire and grow the talent pool and the employee number. But at some points, it puts a constraint on a company to spend money ineffectively to achieve an outcome. Whereas if a company was able to hire contractors or some other ways, they were able to, maybe instead of 5 full-time people, they hired 3 full-time people and spend some money on travel and other ways, they can be more effective in how they use money to get to an outcome. And then long-term success, I think it would optimize for companies. That's kind of one feedback.
No, I think that's really interesting. I do want to kind of shift a little bit to sort of IRAP's perspective on how you're funding clean tech company projects versus other sector projects. Are you approaching it a little bit differently than you would? And I just before you answer that, on Devesh's point about underfunding companies in Canada, we have a grossly interesting negative but perspective where we want to kind of crimp the ventures along, and then a similar company in the States can look at the Pani website, put together a pitch deck, go to a VC and raise $10 million with nothing built yet, and yet Devesh and his team have done all the work. And so I think there's I think we need to reimagine a little bit, not on the government funding side, but how to leverage government dollars to a more globally acceptable valuation parameters for companies that are raising at those earlier levels, because we underfund them and then they crimp along. So Dave, over to you on terms of different perspectives you're looking at to fund clean tech versus other sectors at IRAP.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess we actually write our own plan for every company that we fund, with the expectation that they're going to do something different. Now, it's around the technology, but it's also around the outcomes. So the expectations are they're going to grow their revenue when they bring this product out, or employment, or both, or they're going to get their next raise. If you're a life science company, you're not selling anything through a few of the stages. And so the goal is to set the project so that when the project is complete, they've accomplished what they need to raise their next round of funding. And clean tech is a bit like that as well. We're willing to come in earlier when there isn't a clear path to commercialization yet, because the technology needs to be hardened and improved.
With customer discovery feedback in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if we're talking to a firm and they are all excited about their technology and they can't even imagine ever talking to a real client, we're probably going to give them a pass. They have to be looking to commercialize whatever they're doing, and they have to engage early. And I think it's Stephen Long and his startup, Fast Startups or whatever it is, when he was talking about funding a startup, and this is kind of what IRAP does. In his story, he's talking about someone who wants to have drones, and they're going to scan the crops, and they're going to discover something, and they're going to sell it to the clients. And he says, well, why do you need $100K to buy a drone? Why don't you just put the camera on a stick and walk it around and take the pictures and then show that to the farmers? How much will that cost you? How long will it take? And he says, oh, better yet, why don't you just mock it up and take it to the clients and see if they care? And that'll take you about 2 days. So go away and do that and come back and talk to me. So that's kind of the conversation that we're trying to have with the entrepreneurs, is get to know early, so you can go and do something that's going to be really good for your career.
Yeah, at Foresight we have very similar. I mean, if you have to have at least 20 different customer conversations to feed into your product and technology road mapping. And it's an iterative process because you will pivot and learn along the way. And I think IRAP's the most flexible organization to collaborate when you're at that stage of development. It is already past 9:30. If you have not done the poll questions, please do. I'd like to close off with one more question each, and then the poll questions were actually super interesting and I think would be a good dialogue for us to close off the session. Devesh, let's start with you. I mean, you've got a different mix of people in the room: policy, government, other innovators, funders, industry, who knows. But maybe you can share sort of some of your top, 1, 2, 3 tips that you would share with them as supporters of the innovation ecosystem or as an entrepreneur.
Sure, yeah. Actually, just before that, I just want to plug Foresight a little bit. I think I think it was 2-3 years ago, and I met Jeanette. She was at ERR back then at Foresight, and I interviewed with that, and I was learning more about Foresight, and I was like, oh no, I just don't want to have another mentor, advisor, and not get enough value. And then Jeanette called me and she convinced me, and then I was so thankful. Off that, through Foresight, we've learned a lot about product market fit, go to market fit. So great program altogether. I think if I look at advice like from a policy standpoint and focus that towards, let's say, climate mitigation. If I just focus, how do we get 51 gigatons per year down to a low number? I think, in my opinion, it has to be a very sector-focused play. And I think in Canada, I've been happily surprised that there are so many good companies that are bold enough to make sector-wide goal, like Robert from Carbon Cure. They have a goal to, about reduce 1% global emissions by 2030. Like at PANI, we have that from a water standpoint. So, I think part of me wonders is you take 5-10 of these companies that together, have a 5 to 10% global emission reduction goal, and just double down on some of them.
It's funny you mention that, because we're actually going to be mapping out, because we have so much data on companies, and you're on the list for the new year on like what are the top 10 or 30 Canadian companies that are collectively going to have that impact. The stories need to be told, and these stories help educate, and not only customers in Canada and beyond, but also we do need to double down on some technologies or businesses, and it's hard because government's nature is to want to support everyone.
I agree, and I think there is so much risk right now with decarbonization as an example. Like, we don't know the answers, right? It's like technology risk, there's commercialization risk, there's adoption risk, there's market risk, there's a lot of risks. And for a lot of the companies that have product market fit and they just need to get to scale, money does solve a lot of the problems. It's just the truth, right? Like, it's for us, let's say, if you need to get to 30,000 facilities in 10 years to reach our goal, and it cost me $10,000 to acquire a facility right now, but I need to improve my effectiveness by investing in technology to get it down to 5,000, for example. And if there was money, let's say $50 million in focused efforts, I could acquire 1,000 facilities. I could reduce my cost of acquisition down as well, and it will solve problems. And in the scale of right now globally, where people are investing in sustainable decarbonization, it's a very low ROI. So I think there are some good companies which are willing to figure it out, whether it's technology adoption. So I think if there was some targeted programs with high value goals, I think Canada has an opportunity in the next 10 years to actually make significant global emission reduction, right? And climate change is a global problem, right? We can reduce our emissions here, but if globally we're not able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then the problem doesn't get solved. Like programs like EDC or trade commissioners, if there's a way for all of them to work together, I think they could accelerate a lot of companies and help them be global leaders in their vertical sector.
And Dave, big role at IRAP, and I know you can only share so much, and I was really intrigued by your passion for the space, kicking off this session. Where do you see IRAP evolving in terms of what you can share, programs, funding, digging in on different aspects of in this conversation, clean tech, but.
Yeah. So what do the next 5 years look like? Well, collaboration is an incredibly powerful tool. And we, in 2012, IRAP started working into Europe through the Eureka Network, which is all of the European IRAP equivalents. Now, no one's the same as IRAP, of course, but IRAP equivalents all coming together, including Canada, including South Korea, and now there's Chile and South Africa and a few other international players coming together and working collaboratively to engage companies across borders in collaborative research projects, but also in consortia. And so the goal we have going forward is to leverage a consortia model where we bring like-minded companies together, because many times Canadian firms have a slice of the solution, but not the whole solution. And if we can bring a group of companies together who have all the pieces, so then they can then sell through a fast pilot, sell into M&E multinationals who need the product, it will grow us faster, and the entrepreneurs can come together and maybe even form a company out of it, so that it's bigger, to your point, and it can move faster, and it can tell a story where you can raise money that is significant. Consolidation is a very powerful tool, and that is, as in a broad stroke, that's the key thing that we're going to look at over the next 5 years.
That's really interesting. So Foresight works on the supply and demand side, and on the demand side, we run innovation challenges, and that's where industry is proactive in sharing some of their innovation gaps on their path to net zero. And if multiple industry partners, though seemingly competitive in Canada, though all exporting to tackle global markets, can collaborate on some of those demands, what actually ends up happening is we go through a process and a whole bunch of different companies that are solving different pieces of the puzzle come and apply. And so sometimes you're doing that matchmaking, and IRAP has an incredible database of technologies and information as well. And I'm sure you're looking at, acquisition, partnerships, and things like that. So I see a huge opportunity for consolidating the space and getting those companies better funded, in particular at these later stages, right?
Yeah, and just kind of on a related note, just there's so many soft things that go in running a company as entrepreneurs, and I felt like our app was able to build a relationship with entrepreneurs that they were, first person I would call if there's some problems in terms of advice. And something simple as I moved here from India from my undergrad, and when I graduated, I had a postgraduate work permit, then I was going for my PR. But because I own my own company, I didn't get the points for doing that. So I was kind of in a crunch, and then I called my app ITA, and they helped navigate through that process and made sure that the company is growing. So it's just that flexibility and like the experience the ITAs have is a big value for companies.
All right, let's go into the polling. Are the results to the polling questions somewhere that we can see them? Awesome. Ooh, fun. So the first question, I'm going to stand up because I like to move and run around. I feel a little isolated here. Woo.
Stretch.
Internet's coming, I think. I'll use my phone in the short term. So the first question that was asked is, how would you rate your lifestyle habits in the context of sustainability? This is a really important one for me because industry and government can fund so much, but industry does produce what consumers demand. And so if I can encourage everyone to look at some of their habits and turn off their lights and use less water, drive less far, I think that'd be great. But a lot of people are really doing and incorporating some of these changes. No one is completely green because it's hard, so certainly to be expected. But we see a lot of innovation coming that is going to help educate consumers and get consumers on a pathway to understanding what incremental steps they can take. And as technology becomes more readily available at cost, even things like electric cars, they're still expensive. There's not a lot of infrastructure. So there are steps that as a society we need to take as well. Next question. How would you rate your work environment in the context of sustainability? So we're at about a 3 out of 5. Most majority are over, 50%, assuming 2.5 is 50% there. So some good numbers. Let's dig into the next one. That's more sort of policy based. What do you see as a big challenge facing the adoption of sustainable and clean tech solutions by industry? I don't know how many of you in the room, maybe you can raise your hand. How many of you have heard from an innovator or an industry partner that it's still hard to adopt technology? Yeah. From the hundreds of companies we support, domestic adoption does still tend to be a barrier and a consideration. And I think there's a lot of work going into trying to change that mentality. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that put other, but unfortunately we see all of the above. But I love that there's actually a concrete one where the cost associated with adopting green infrastructure is highlighted. Personally, we're really intrigued by things like the Net Zero Accelerator, the Strategic Innovation Fund, and other mechanisms that government is using to deploy capital in where industry's matching the funds.
Yeah, what I'd add is it's all fine to fund the development of the projects, but you need to have buyers. And for instance, Carbon Cure, who's not here, they're in, I think, 150 plants right now. What if the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal governments, and all of the not-for-profits said, any cement I buy has to be carbon neutral by X time period. And I think Carbon Cure's product would probably be deployed in a lot of places in Canada. But we don't do that. We kind of stumble along and it's okay.
And then what ends up happening is the companies go and they find customers, and those customers pull them into those other regions. And we certainly don't want to lose talent and capital, human capital, to these regions.
And then the other regions buy them. Yeah. That's what happens.
Yeah, and I would second that, right? Like, I think having your first few customers within 100-kilometer radius is so much. I know it sounds simple, but that can change you from getting commercial from 2 years to 1 year. But didn't
you just tell us that all of your initial projects are for?
And that's why it took me longer. Yeah, exactly. And that's why it took me longer. I wish I was able to have a customer. I still do. have that wish.
Well, when I
And-
met you, you were hustling with everyone
Yeah.
around. I use the term hustle lightly. Please chime in.
Dave, you mentioned that IRAP clients, there's a clause that they can't sell.
Out. They can't sell out. Can't sell out.
the company.
Change of ownership is actually the phrase.
Do they have to, if they do sell, are they allowed to sell to foreign companies?
In the contract, if there's a change of ownership, you have to put up your hand and come and talk to us. And if we do not see the benefits to Canada accruing, then we'll ask for our money back.
And is that, do you tell the investors that? And what's their reaction?
That's a good question. I think the way it's set up, though, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if you do get acquired, but the operations stay in Canada, you're fine.
It's around the benefits of Canada. So
yeah.
we have to see that.
So I think they're usually okay with this because normally if you get acquired, they would want to use the team. You know, they acquire a company for the team and stuff, so they would keep operations there. Like it's happened, I know a few companies that went through IRAP, they were acquired. So it's not that big of a deal breaker for investors.
Yeah, it's simply when a foreign entity, or any entity, takes down the company and takes the IP. That's when we get, then we want our money back.
This is a very sensitive topic because, government is putting money into investing in these companies. And then there's this perception at the end of the day, if policy drives domestic adoption, this conversation will be less prevalent and of a concern. And an example is with Carbon Cure, where I saw Robert at a whole bunch of conferences saying, buy our concrete. And if it's not in the specifications across, in particular, municipal, some provincial, governments, it just doesn't happen. And in some instances outside of, concrete, and another example is zero emission vehicles. They left out hydrogen for some time. It was electric, and then you're stifling, and other regions are looking at hydrogen. So, and policy isn't perfect. Innovators aren't perfect. Certainly venture capital isn't perfect. But there is an opportunity, I think, to have these honest conversations and really, I think there's an opportunity to simplify some of the policies in Canada from an adoption perspective, focus on what targets you want the industry to hit, less on the how, and just give those timelines so that industry can figure out that market process.
And just on that point, I think because this is still a problem for us, right? Like selling locally, it's not cost effective, time effective even today. And I think there's two phases to that if policy could help. One is the latter stage that you mentioned, Dave. If once you have figured out procurement, then how do you accelerate the purchasing? By making standards, by just helping municipalities or whatever the vertical focus is to choose your category of products. But then it's the early stage. Like how can procurement be easier? Like right now, municipalities, as an example, or industries, there's not enough incentives for them to take the risk and avoid an RFP process to buy products and solutions. And like for us, it's easier for me to sell down in Washington to utility than to my city utility.
And sometimes it's not even government or industry procurement. Commitment will be made and it takes 18 months to get a permit. And then these ventures and technology companies just don't have those timelines. And quite frankly, industry gets, annoyed and they move on to the next shiny object. One thing, we can move on to the next question, but just to close off on this one, I do believe, and I think, Devesh, you touched on it, there is a bit of a sector reflection that needs to go into solving each of those four buckets. You can't look at the industry holistically under one umbrella. Which sector do you believe to be the most promising in their ability to adopt clean technology? Oh, I can't wait to see what people think, because I don't think people are going to like my response. Transportation is certainly one. Yeah. If the government would procure and start implementing electric and hydrogen vehicles, and maybe there'll be some new technologies. One of the ones that I put up, Oil and gas, so energy sector. So believe it or not, I know it's a controversial topic. The reality is the energy sector has invested the most in CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, storage, hydrogen, renewables, and I think we need to acknowledge that. Now, there's certainly aspects of that sector that need to be under more scrutiny, but we've seen significant investments come from that sector. So it's hard for us not to acknowledge that. Next one. If you gentlemen want to comment, please.
I think it's important to remember that the energy sector in this country is a very important driver of tax payments. And to lose that without commensurate increases in other exports and tax regime, our quality of life will change dramatically. And I'm not advocating that we should just continue to burn coal. We just need to recognize the importance of that sector.
Why is it that, when we talk about energy, when we talk about oil and gas, you prefix it? This is bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah. I prefix it because I was at COP.
Manufacturing as well, right? I mean, manufacturing is a very complex.
Yeah, it's a great point. At COP, I was getting messages to sign petitions to have, certain panels removed. And I pushed back. I said, if we don't have these people at the table, we have a serious problem. You remove collaboration, you isolate. And so that's probably why there's some preface there, but it's a great point. What area do you see as the most challenging for industry? So a tie here. Using less energy or alternative energy sources, regulatory and policy instability. I want to, Devesh is here, so we're going to really focus on water. Foresight has a water stream of activity, and we partner, actually, IRAP is a partner on that as well. But as you mentioned, 20% of energy consumption goes into, cleaning, purifying, and keeping, our water source fresh, right? So we cannot, neglect that conversation.
Yeah, and I think, so take water as an example. So actually, if you take all water treatment, distribution, like all water handling, it's actually about 10% global emissions, but less than a percentage of climate tech investments last year went into water. And it's primarily because it's fragmented. Like industries, manufacturing use a lot of water actually, but they're not water companies. And a lot of water companies are municipalities. They handle a lot of water. And there's not enough incentives. They don't have much competition for municipalities. It's almost a monopoly, right? And so I think there's a lot of challenges in sectors like those where they're not going to be beaten up by competition if they don't decarbonize. So there has to be other incentives enforced or enough like problem solving from a business standpoint that makes it easier for them. And that's been our challenge over the last few years, is how do we make it a super simple decision for them to decarbonize, but also save money, reduce risk. And I think the more there is investment in solutions that get people started, like they don't have to decarbonize today. Like we go in, we say it's a 4-step process. First step is just measure where you're at. And when they measure, they start measuring other things at the plant and they start actually running the plant better. And then second is let's optimize with just software, no retrofit needed. Use your OpEx budget, just start optimizing, and that's like 10-15% reduction. And then third step for them is retrofits. And then the final is offsets. So, but over time they get...
Oh, that'd be a fun topic.
Yeah. I think the point is over time they get smarter, right? The change management happens, and they start realizing that you can actually reduce risk and reduce money spend by making your process more effective.
Devesh, are you doing any work to try to get international standards for your product, and can government help do it?
That would be very helpful for us, and we're not doing that. But if there is ways for us to do that with government, that could make or break for initiatives like this. Yeah.
Dave, does IRAP help on that score? Is that over there?
Canadian Standards Association is the place to go.
Okay.
To start with and see what they're doing.
We should talk. One thing I will say sometimes too, there's that would be an incredible body of work that would not only help Devesh and others, but you need a full funded 100% 1 or 2 people that will do that. And it's otherwise it's done off the side of someone's desk. It's not done well, and it's a distraction from your business. And that hopefully that's a place where Foresight and other organizations can consolidate those issues and say, here's a roadmap on decarbonizing your water processes, And here are some of the tools that would help, these top 5 water companies, really, do something great, both domestically and globally. But let's move on to the next question. And while we're transitioning on that policy piece, policy does set the tone for private capital and investors, period. Yeah. I think we'll have to go a little, we'll end in the next few. In which ways do you think government can encourage the adoption of clean tech, particularly in areas where it may be difficult for a shift? Interesting. The top one was subsidies and grants for research and development. I think it's funny because a lot of us are shaking our heads. I didn't pick this one. I think I picked myself procurement.
Wow. Anyone but this.
Tax incentives for going green. I want to touch on tax incentives just again because I'm fresh out of COP. What we heard, which was concerning, but perhaps a reality from the Minister of Finance from Holland, Egypt, the head of HSBC, the head of the International Monetary IMF, basically that incentives will be required for private capital to deploy the capital that they've committed. So even though they've made those commitments, there's a reality check here that there's going to have to be some incentives to get that money flowing. And I think that needs some serious reflection and conversation, not something we'll solve to here. And we're not the ones that would solve a lot of that, but things like basically first loss capital funds and de-risking, earlier stage investments and project financing and things like that are going to be a hot topic, I think, in the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think California just announced that by 20-something, 30 or 35, all cars on the road have to be electric. They should probably have added hydrogen to it, but electric. And did California put any money on the table? I don't think so. So I think carrots and encouragement plus procurement practices can change a lot, especially when you're looking at technologies that exist. We struggle. I mean, municipalities are broke in Canada and will continue to be forever broke because of the structure that they have. How do you incentivize them to...
or at least give capacity to help them take a step back and look strategically at their balance sheet, look strategically at their purchasing power. Okay, we're going down some rabbit holes. It's exciting stuff, though. Yeah.
We can get all excited, but we don't have that much time.
I know. I feel like we could talk for all day.
I think just one thing to add, like what I've seen in some other markets work well is that there's some large infrastructure companies, they get debt or loans or equity from banks. There is actually mandates for ESG or greenhouse gas reductions there. And that enforces them now to buy products as a financial incentive. That's how they're going to get money. And if within Canada, if there are some lending for larger infrastructure projects, if there's some ways to incorporate, like you have to move in this direction or procure from these types of companies, that may accelerate some things.
I also think the public needs to be more involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
I think we're missing that we don't have the same intensity of conversation in the general public around climate change that we really need to, and electing governments who can change the policies, change the procurements, et cetera. So it's a gap that we have.
Yeah. If you want to put up the next question, I think we need to get ready to close off. Did you want to ask a quick question?
Do you think the carbon pricing is a pretty good mechanism for actually
I think
so.
Carbon pricing for me is a must. Yeah. It's incredible how people, the general consumer, I mean, I talk to my friends, we're all living and breathing the conversations around carbon tax. When I talk to my friends, they just think, oh, my prices are going up, but not connecting all the dots on how their actions can actually drive their own pricing down. So I think we're 10 years away from that. But for industry and, for second-tier emissions, for sure.
And I think tax in general, though, over the decades, when tax has evolved as well, right? Just tax for civilization. Like, it took us a long time to figure out how to properly tax and get money out. And, like, I think with carbon pricing, I think that's going to be the same way. I think it's important, but we just need to figure out how to implement it so it doesn't disadvantage the folks we don't want to disadvantage. Yeah.
There's some really interesting points here. I think we need to, unfortunately, close off for the day. Devesh, any sort of final comments you want to share with the audience before we do that? And then I'll pass it to you, Dave, and then I'll make a few quick statements. And you can all get ready for your break.
Yeah, no, I think climate sector is super exciting. Like, I think all the unicorns in the next 10 years will be in climate. I think the equity markets are moving towards climate. It's even right now with venture capital being tough, like climate still is going strong. So I think Canada has a unique opportunity to lead in that arm, not necessarily from Canadian emission reductions, but exporting technologies to reduce that. And I'm happy to help and talk more of how we can make that happen.
So I would say that it's not just about funding and supporting companies to be in this space. The country needs to take a more holistic view of how they're going to price the carbon, how they're going to change the regulations, how they're going to procure products that meet the standards that we want to set, et cetera, and to do that in a paced time way where we are less forgiving than we perhaps have been in the past and sort of let the target, oh, well, next year will be fine. No, I think we need to hold the line. And it needs a whole of government, but it's a whole of population conversation. So, when you go home and you're talking to your neighbor, talk to them about carbon credits.
And I just want to say, there's some great things happening, but there's a lot not happening fast enough. And I don't know about you, I'll wake up one day and be like, yes, we're doing great stuff. And the next day I'm like, oh my God, my daughter's never going to have a planet to live on. So, removing that emotion, collaboration is number one. Number two, it's okay to develop new policy and offer new funding and try new things. Sometimes it's okay to take things away as well. We're layering on so much sometimes from if you're in policy and government that it can get very complicated. So let's be honest about ourselves. What's working, what's not, and let's start not with a blank sheet, but let's really figure out how we can take resources that perhaps aren't having that impact and really apply them to the areas that are. And we're seeing a lot of that modeled in Europe and other countries. Let's learn from each other, collaborate, and I'm 100% certain that Canada can lead. So thank you all for coming. Hope you had a great morning, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, everybody.